my name is Jeremy. As he said, I'm an AWS hero, and I am also the CEO and founder of a company called MinOps. Oh, yes? Oh, okay, yeah. I think he heard you about the music, yes? Can we turn the music off? Okay, thank you. All right, my name is Jeremy. I am the CEO and founder of a company called MinOps. We have not launched yet, but when we do, we will be launching a cool AWS product. So you should sign up for our mailing list and find out what it is. Also, I have been working on remote teams for about 2 years now, and been on and off remote for a while. So I'm here to talk to you about remote teams and how to make remote teams work, pitfalls, things to look out for, stuff like that. So hopefully it'll be interesting to you. And as we've already given away, the answer is probably a 100% remote team is probably possible. I've been doing it for a few years, and so far it's been working out okay, so hopefully it'll keep working out. I wanted to start with a quick survey. How many of you have ever worked remotely before? Ever? All right, almost everybody. How many of you work at somewhere where you can work remotely more than half the time today? More than 75% of the time? Cool. How many of you are working 100% remote right now? Awesome. All right. How many of you that are working 100% remote think that it actually works? It seems like only about half the people have raised their hands. Okay, so now my next question is, how many of you that worked remote are everyone in your company is doing it, not just you? Okay, now the 4 of you, how many of you think that works? Yeah, okay, so we'll get to that in a little bit. Today's journey, I want to talk to you a little bit about why you should embrace remote work, especially if you're a manager, why it's good, why it'll be a good thing for you, reasons that it can work for you. Basically, I'm here to convince you that it's a good idea, but I will also tell you reasons why it may not work, and then I'll intermix it with some success and failure stories of my own. So only 4.5% of the population lives in the United States, the world's population. And if you look at the Bay Area, that's a tiny, tiny fraction. So if your company is based in the Bay Area and you're only hiring people in the Bay Area, you're severely limiting yourselves to the number of people on this planet. Luckily, technology has finally caught up, especially with things like the cloud, where we can now have remote work, and it works out pretty well. We have the technology, we can communicate. And it's actually existed for a long time, but it's getting better and better. Saving money is a nice side effect. One of the reasons my company chose originally to go remote was because we thought renting an office was kind of a waste of money. But it turns out that this is actually a really bad reason to go remote if that's the only reason you're doing it. There's lots of other reasons to do it, which we'll get into. And so today a lot of people say, oh, but I like to go to the office because they feed me and they have massages and nap pods and all that stuff. But really, these are just 1960s perks taken to the 21st century, right? Instead of the corner office and the company car, thank you, you get food and massages and bikes. But all of these things are really just to trick you to stay at the office, right? That's why breakfast ends at 7:30 in the morning and dinner starts at 7:30 at night, because then you got to stay there for 12 hours if you want to get all 3. Another big downside of the office is that it's a single point of failure. If all of the people are in the office and something happens to the office, that's really bad for your company. Even if something doesn't happen to the people themselves, just if the office has no internet or something like that, suddenly you've got a large chunk of people who can't get any work done or can't fix the website. So I used to work at Reddit. We had a small office in San Francisco, and one time the DSL went down. And so, it was impossible for us to do any work or know if Reddit was up or down. And back then, knowing if it was up or down was really important because it was down quite a lot. So not having internet was really, really bad. Luckily, we had like 3G on the cell phone, which kind of solved it, but not really. And another downside of the office is all the interruptions, right? You're sitting there working, and somebody walks by and says, hey, did you see the game last night? Or maybe they're actually talking to you about work, but you were in the coding zone, and now they're taking you out of the coding zone. One of the nice things about working at home, assuming you can eliminate the interruptions there, is that you can ignore people because the only ways that they have to communicate with you, you can turn off. You can turn off your chat and your video chat and all that stuff. Another nice thing is no commute. I have thoroughly enjoyed not having a commute for the last 2 years. Today, I had to commute here from the South Bay, and it just reinforced how much I love not having to commute. Having to come all the way to San Francisco, even though it was midday and there was no traffic, was a huge pain. And then paying for parking too. So yeah, not having a commute is super nice, and it gives me a bunch of extra time to actually get work done, right? Because then I don't have to go anywhere, and so I can work late or work early or whatever. And people are less stressed when their errands are done. So one of the nice things about working remotely is that if I have to run an errand midday, I can do that, or I can do it in the morning and then be done for the day and not be worrying about it. And I've seen this in my employees as well, right? So this is a really nice benefit for my employees. My employees really like this, the fact that they can go out, they can get their stuff done during the day, they can work later, right? They have flexible work hours, basically. So another nice benefit. And being able to choose where you work is a nice perk, right? You can work on the deck, you can work out at the beach, you can work in the mountains, you can work in a hole in a basement in the dark if that's what you like. Whatever it is, that's where you can work. I've gone on family vacations where I basically just sit out on the deck overlooking Lake Tahoe for a week while my family goes and has fun without me. But at least I'm there at night so I can go gamble at night. Until I had a kid, and then I can't do that anymore. And remote work enables family time. So as it turns out, about 2 years ago is when I started doing this fully remote working, and that's also when I had my first kid. And so that worked out really nicely because I get to spend time with her when she's awake. So the first couple months she was alive, I was still working at somewhere else, at Netflix, and so going in the office. And I would basically leave before she woke up, and I would get home right when it was time for her to go to bed. And that really sucked because I missed out on like everything she was doing. So it's been a nice perk that in the middle of the day I can stop and I can go to her gymnastics or her clay class or whatever she's doing now, and then work around that. So that's been really important for me, and it's been nice for my employees too, because it actually makes them much more loyal to the company because they feel like there's a good work-life balance there, and their spouses feel like there's a good work-life balance. And my sleep schedule got a lot more natural. So my natural wake-up time is about 9 a.m. and go to bed at 1, and that doesn't work very well when you have to be in an office, right? Because if you wake up at 9 and you shower and get ready and work out, you're not getting into the office till about 11 o'clock. And if you work at an office, most of the time, they're not too keen on that. So I've found that my schedule is much more natural. I almost never set an alarm anymore, which is nice, so I can just get up whenever, and that usually works out. Another nice benefit is tax avoidance. Not tax evasion, that would be illegal, but tax avoidance, so for example, state of Washington, no income tax, so go live in Washington, and you've just increased your salary by 10%, right? If you left California, for example. Apologies to those of you from Seattle who hate all the Californians coming in. But, you know, things like that. So you can find lower cost of living places and places with lower taxes outside the country. I have a friend who specifically left the United States to go to Panama so that he could get $200,000 of tax-free money every year. So he works remotely from there, saves himself a bunch of taxes. Also a hardcore libertarian. And just working from home is nice, right? You can listen to music without the headphones. You don't have people harassing you about your how you dressed or whether you're clean and whether you showered, although you probably should, and all of that good stuff. So working remotely doesn't necessarily mean working from home, right? It could be working from a coffee shop or this loft or this space or whatever. But what does that mean, right? That means, one, your employees might still be spending money to work in a place. So it's helpful to provide them with benefits for doing that, like Starbucks cards or whatever, if that's where they like to work, or pay for a co-working space or whatever it is. So they don't necessarily, they're still working somewhere, and there's still a cost to that, but you at least are helping them out with that. It also means that security is really important, right? So if your people and your IP and your data are going to be all over the place, then you really need it's really important to have a good security policy for your company that you stress upon all of your employees, right? You need to make sure that they're locking their screen when they walk away, that they're locking their phones and their tablets, that they're using two-factor authentication, that they're using VPNs whenever possible, that your website, everything is SSL, so that nobody is sniffing your private data off the wire. All of those things, right? These are all really important. Ideally, they're enforced through the tools that you're using, but also it's important that if you have a remote workforce that you have a slightly higher level of security consciousness within your workforce, because that is going to be a much bigger attack surface for hackers or your enemy companies, whatever it is. That's going to be another way in. And then, so at the beginning, I took that survey, right? And I asked everybody, does remote work at your company? And this is really the crux of it all, right? This idea of remote first culture. Is the culture remote first? Is the culture designed around remote work? Because if you just have one person who's doing remote work, then they're going to be shunted and pushed out to the side. It has to be everybody, or at least a whole group has to be remote working. And so a couple of stories around this, right? So I used to work at Reddit, and we were basically an in-person team. We all came to the office every day, and we worked in the office. And very occasionally, I would have to do some remote work. And so I would stay at home, and basically decisions would be made, and things would happen, and I would have no clue about any of it, because nobody bothered to fill me in, because it just wasn't part of our culture. But at the same time, because everybody I worked with was fresh out of college, they still believed in winter break. So every year, come around mid-December, nobody would come to the office anymore because they would all go back to the East Coast to go be with their families or take trips for Christmas or whatever it was. So for about 2 to 3 weeks in the winter, we were a fully remote company. And all of a sudden, remote working was great. It worked out perfectly because when everybody was remote, it forced us to make decisions collaboratively online, in IRC. We had to email about them. We couldn't basically just turn around and make a decision. So it's interesting how the culture could quickly shift around remote work just by the fact that everybody left the office. So if you're working at a place where you're trying to get remote work to happen, one way to do that is to force everyone to leave for a week, right? Say we're shutting down the office for a week. Everybody should work remotely for a week and then see how it goes, right? Especially if you have management that's complaining about, oh, remote work doesn't work. Try to use that as a lever, right? Try to convince people, hey, let's all leave for a week and see what happens. At Netflix, it was kind of the same, right? There was no remote work. It was just everyone's in the office, no remote work. But there was one team that worked remotely, the CDN team. And so they had all their tooling and everything set up so that they could work remotely. They had some people in the office and some people around the world, and they worked great remotely amongst themselves, and then they worked non-remotely with the rest of us. And one of the nice things, so the reason this worked well at Netflix is because of this idea of distributed computing and distributed teams work nicely, right? So if you have different teams, they can have different policies around remote work or different policies around deployment, different policies around testing. And so it works out nicely that you can have this sort of division. So what is the key to success of a remote team? Asynchronous communication, right? That is really the key. The more things you can do asynchronously, the better off that you will be. If you can do all of your communication asynchronously, that's great. If you can do your coding asynchronously, that's great. And there's a bunch of tools about that we'll talk about in a second. But time zones still matter, right? So this chart I like because what it shows you is how far off of solar time that part of the world is. And I find that interesting that like basically all of Asia is off of solar time. But anyway, time zones still matter, right? You still need your people to occasionally collaborate in real time, even if it's fully remote. No matter how asynchronous you get, there's always going to be something that can't be asynchronous. So you still need to have some sort of synchronicity on the time zone. 7 to 9 time zones seems to be about the max that works out well, because if you're 9 time zones apart, then when one person is just starting, the other's just ending. Anything beyond that makes it really difficult to work. For those who have worked with remote teams from the West Coast, say, to India, which is about 12 hours away, you're probably familiar with how difficult that is, right, for everybody involved. So time zones are still very important to think about. And you need to have extra communication options, right? When you have a fully remote team, you need to have a lot of ways to communicate with each other, because you have lost a lot of ways to communicate. You've lost the drive-bys, the hallway conversations, the overheard in the lunchroom, so you need to make up for that somehow. Amazon, luckily, now has a product to help you with that, Amazon Chime, which actually I've used and works really, really well. I was actually really surprised how well it worked, considering it was brand new, but I guess since it was an acquisition, it wasn't totally brand new. But anyway, it was cool, and I'm not just saying that because they put me here today. So Slack is the one that we use mostly for our chats, and then we've got your phone if you really, really need to. We've got Google Hangouts. Now, how many of you remember Apple iChat from like 10 years ago? Almost nobody, right? Okay, so Apple iChat was like this huge thing. It was in the keynote. Steve Jobs got up there and he stood on the stage and he started a call with one guy, and then all of a sudden the second person came in and everyone was like, oh, 2 people on video chat, and it was crazy. But I used iChat when I worked at Reddit back in 2008, and 2 of our people were in Australia at the time, and one of us, me, was in the West Coast and another was on the East Coast. And we had a flawless video chat. There was an imperceptible delay. The video was crystal clear. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. It looked like that with the drop shadows. I don't know why they killed it. It was the best video chat product ever and still is today. And so if any of you have any influence over Apple, please tell them to bring this back, because it was by far the best chat experience I've ever had. Google Chats is great, but like try to talk to someone in Australia and you just get a bunch of blocks that are choppy. It's I don't know what they did. They did magic, but it was so much better. So another really important thing is this idea of everything being tracked in the open. And now what's interesting is even if you are not a remote team, a lot of these policies would be really great for you, right? Like especially this one. GitHub is super central to what we do. Everything coding related is done in GitHub. Even like semi-coding related business stuff is done in GitHub. We use the GitHub wikis to keep track of a bunch of stuff. Everything is done through pull requests. So basically all code related discussion happens in GitHub. Sometimes it happens in Slack, and we have to remember to say, hey, let's take this to GitHub so that we have the record of it and it's there. Even the tiniest little change is done with a pull request so that we can keep track of it, basically Git flow. Anything that isn't code related, we try to keep track of in Trello. So we have a bunch of Trello boards with all of the tasks that are involved for the company that are not related, all the way down to like making the t-shirts and stuff like that, who it's assigned to, what they're doing with it. And basically this being in the open is very important, because when you're sitting in an office, you can turn around and you can see that this person is working on making the t-shirts right now, or that they're writing code in this module or whatever it is. But when you're apart from each other, you can't. So it's important. It gives you a nice side benefit of tracking, which I'll talk about in a sec. But shared calendars are super key. We have shared calendars, so we have the Google calendars makes this really easy, where you can just see each other's calendar. I have my personal calendar on the corporate calendar, so they know when I'm busy, things like that. And then the wiki is really important. And again, this is something that like any good company should be doing, but we try to put everything that's non-code related into the wiki. So anytime a new employee starts, their very first task is go read the new employee start page, and anytime you have to ask a question, put it in the wiki, right? So that the wiki gets better. Anytime you find something that's wrong, fix it, so on and so forth. So that document is always at least as up to date as the last hire. And other wiki pages like that, like the mission statement and the personality of our chatbot and all of that, those are all kept in the wiki. And large open source projects are a really great model to follow. So, look at the Linux kernel. Look how the Linux kernel communicates. They have a mailing list. They have pull requests. Well, I guess it's not so recent anymore, but came to GitHub so that they could use all the GitHub tools. But if you want a great model of how this can work, just go look at the Linux kernel and see how they're collaborating. And it's really unfortunate, by the way, that IFTT, whatever you want to call it, had a great recipe for like merging Google Calendars across accounts, but it broke. So it's really hard for my personal calendar to show up for my employees so that they can see when I'm busy or not. But basically I have to block it twice. So if anyone knows a good solution to that, I definitely would like to know about that. And then another important thing is this idea of not locking up any single piece of information in one mind or one computer, right? This is good practice in general, again, but especially important when you are a fully remote team, because if that person goes offline for a while, that information is gone. If that person's not in the office, so they may not have as good physical security around their laptop or fire protection or whatever it is that your office might offer that someone's home may not. So it's extra important to have shared sources of information. There's Dropbox, there's Amazon Work Docs, there's the wikis again, Dropbox, whatever it is. But basically try to keep everything on a remote share. So we use Dropbox for all of our files. Everything is there. Nobody ever works on something locally except their Dropbox that's syncing automatically. So any work I do is automatically synced up to the cloud. So it's never just living on my laptop. The closest I get is code that I write is only on my laptop till I commit it to Git. But once I commit it to Git, it immediately syncs up. Because one of our policies, best practices is to always push as soon as you commit, and commit every time you walk away from the computer. So basically, we're always pushing into Git. And it's important to remember that not everything needs an answer right away. In fact, almost nothing needs an answer right away. You discover this every time you go on vacation and you come back and you realize that 99% of the urgent emails you got turned out not to be urgent after all. They solved the problem themselves. They found us another solution, whatever it was. So it's just extra important when you're working remotely with people with different schedules on different time zones to remember that not everything needs an answer. And so, email, if you send an email, don't expect an answer for a couple hours. If it's an IM, you should at least wait a few minutes. But here's where Slack gets really interesting, right? Because Slack is kind of like an IM platform where you expect an answer in a few minutes. But at the same time, we have channels where somebody will put in a question and 2 weeks later, an answer shows up because it took that long to figure out the answer. So it's like this weird hybrid of like mailing list and instant chat, and it becomes a problem because then it becomes the only archive of that information. So we try really, really hard to not use Slack as like go look at that message from 6 months ago to figure out how that thing is done. If it's like here's a command line to do this thing that we're gonna do, put it in the wiki, right? So it's really important to get stuff out of your instant communication methods and into your more permanent methods. Stripe had this really great system where basically every single email you wrote was CC'd to a mailing list. And sometimes nobody ever read that mailing list. It was just straight to an archive. But at least it was there so that when a new employee came, they could jump on and read the archive of that mailing list that nobody actually read in real time, but was great for new employees. Pretty much every communication they had was CC'd to some mailing list, except for like the very direct personal-to-personal communication. I thought that was a pretty good policy, although they had to build a whole bunch of tools to manage Google Groups to make it work well. So that's something that we haven't adopted yet because we haven't wanted to take the time to build the tooling for it. So, Another thing that we've found doing this for a couple of years is that weekly check-ins are pretty critical. We tried for a while to skip the weekly check-ins to see if we could go fully asynchronous, and it just got to be, we were just too out of sync. There's just too many things that sort of just come up when you're talking to someone. So for a while we had a Slack bot that every day would say, hey, write a sentence about what you did today, what you're going to do tomorrow, and something interesting, not work related. And that was kind of nice, but there was still like a bunch of stuff that just sort of never made it into those updates. So no matter how many memos and updates and whatever you write, it's never going to have everything. And if it does, then you're probably spending way too much time writing memos and updates. So this is another thing where those time zones become really important, because to have a weekly video check-in, everybody has to agree to be at the same place at the same time. So the further apart you are, the harder it is to find a time that's good for everybody. But we've found that it's definitely very critical to have that sort of, if not exactly face-to-face, at least I can see the person and talk to them and have an interactive conversation with them. And occasionally, you just have to meet in person, right? Humans are social creatures. We like to interact with each other face-to-face. We've been doing it for millions of years. It's hard to break the habit. Even if you're super introverted, it's still important to see people in person once in a while. It's also a nice perk because you get free travel as an employee, which employees usually enjoy, especially if you let them bring their families with. Or, sometimes they tell you to please don't allow families, but whatever the case may be. But either way, it's a nice perk. People like it. And even the biggest introverts still like human interaction, right? I have a friend who considers themselves the most introverted person in the world. They moved to a tiny town in Colorado, figuring I'm an introvert, it's not going to matter. That lasted 3 months. And then they said, you know what? I'm an introvert, but I still need to see a human like once a week. So they moved to Seattle, which is, not exactly a place for introverts or extroverts, but that was their solution. So as I mentioned before, one of the nice things about all of this remote work and having a lot of collaboration is that managers do get a nice paper trail. But as a manager, it's important to be very careful that you aren't micromanaging and using the paper trail to micromanage, right? Don't go in there to your employee and say, hey, I noticed that you didn't do any Git check-ins today. What's going on? It's really important to take a step back and make sure that you're still evaluating people on the work that they're getting done and how they're performing, and not dig into the paper trail that is nice to have, but you don't want to use it against them, because if you start using it against people, then they just stop doing it, right? They stop filling out the paperwork, they'll just kind of try to get around it as much as possible, and then that's bad for everybody, because now nobody's collaborating and everybody is doing a bad thing, right? It's kind of like this. I worked for a company once where the purpose of the postmortem for an incident was to determine whose bonus would be dinged. So people stopped showing up to the postmortems because if you weren't there, you couldn't get blamed. So then they made it a policy that if you weren't there, then it was automatically you. So then everybody would show up and just be quiet. Nobody would ever collaborate to try to figure out what the problem was, because the moment you spoke up, your bonus was at risk. So this was a terrible way to do things, right? So this is where you have your micromanagement and your paper trail, and that's a bad negative experience. So there is an overhead to managing a remote team. You definitely need to spend more time on check-ins, more time talking to the people who report to you or who work with you, more time giving feedback to each other, because you're going to be missing out on a lot of social interaction where you can be getting some feedback. You're going to be missing out on the random hallway check-in. You're going to be missing out on being able to see the face and the visual cues when you talk to the employees. So it's really important to spend extra time checking in, create extra ways for people to give hard feedback, make opportunities. So as a manager, it's really important to sit down with your employees and solicit that hard feedback. Specifically ask them, how can I be doing a better job? Is there anything that you have concerns about? Things like that. You're going to miss the person cowering in the corner hiding from you because they're afraid of you. So you need to draw that out of them. So it definitely requires you to be more in tune with extracting feelings from the employees, but it's not like a panacea of, oh, as a manager this will be so much easier. It's actually a lot harder. Another important thing to worry about is language issues. So when you're remote, there's a lot of extra language necessary, right? We have to write a lot more to each other when we're in chats. We need to communicate through our pull requests, etc. So it's important that we have a common language, right? And in the world today, that common language tends to be English. So especially if you're working with a worldwide remote team, so cover letters are actually a great way to sort of test for this, right? Can they write, and don't be a nitpick about the grammar, that's not important. The question is, did they communicate effectively with you as far as what they were trying to tell you? So it's, don't be a nitpick about grammar, especially when you're in a chat room, right? Nobody's going to use good grammar, but you want to make sure that you at least understand what the person is trying to say. And then attitude is extra important as well. Things that you can say in person can come off very rude or sarcastic when written down without seeing the smile. Luckily, we have emojis to help us solve this problem. So, the Emoji Movie is a documentary, right, about how to use emojis. But ignoring those, we still need to communicate effectively. So we need to make sure to be extra nice and things like that. And this has been a problem for me and working on, not from people that I work with, I should say, about, and I guess myself too, right, is you can write things that come off as very rude and abrupt. And so this kind of goes back to the whole, it's important to meet in meet space once in a while to learn that that person you're talking to, turns out they're just very upfront or forward. It's not that they're rude, something like that. So one of the nice things about having a fully remote team is that you're evaluated and you can evaluate people on the work they produce. Good work product is really the only way to evaluate them because they either did what you needed or they didn't do what you needed. You're not looking at whether they were in the seat for 8 hours a day or anything like that. Being politically savvy is less helpful when you're on a remote team, and that's a good thing, right? That means you can't suck up to get ahead. You actually have to do great work because it's much more out there, especially with all the tracking and with the only way to really evaluate the people who work for you, the people you work for, the people you work with, is based on their work product and what they're producing and what's coming out. Another important thing is junior employees and remote work don't always mix. So junior employees are often very eager to learn, and they want to absorb knowledge and do all these new things all the time. But what they don't have a lot of experience with is what a mature person in the workplace looks like. So they don't have a lot of experience with how to work in a group and how to produce a work product that's finished and things like that. So you can deal with those things, but it's going to add some extra overhead. And it's going to be really hard because a junior employee oftentimes wants to have a mentor there that can show them sort of how to do these things, and that's a lot easier to do when you're sitting right next to them or near them. So just, a word of caution that there's junior employees are going to definitely require a lot more work as a remote employee, just for the basics, like, hey, when you say that you're going to be online in an hour and you decide to go to the bar, you should let somebody know that. Because that's happened before. And it's also really important to set a good example, and this is true whether it's remote work or not, honestly, but it's really, really easy to overwork when you're a fully remote team, right? It's really easy to wake up, roll out of bed, actually not even get out of bed, just roll over to the laptop that's next to you and start working, right? So it's really important to, one, not do that, or you're going to burn yourself out, and two, to set a really good example. So I still have trouble with this where I might send a request to somebody who works for me on Sunday at 7 o'clock at night, and I try to tell them like, oh no, you don't have to answer until Monday, but it's really hard to tell someone not to do that after they've seen the question. So sometimes I have to catch myself and just write it down to myself and remember to send it out in the morning just to set a better example of not working all the time. But of course, telling you that now you know that I work all the time. But it's just really important in general to try to avoid working weekends, holidays, set a good example so you don't burn yourself out, because it's extra easy to do that, especially if you can work from anywhere at any time. And by having a fully remote team, it means that your tooling makes it more available for you to work anywhere, right? Because everything we do is asynchronous, it's really easy for me to sit there at a football game and do work when I'm supposed to be watching the game. So it's extra important because it's so easy to overwork. It's also really important to hire for self-driven people, self-motivated people. This becomes extra important with the remote workforce. If you're in person, you can have somebody who's maybe not super motivated because they'll be motivated just by the fact that they got up and came to the office and everyone around them is doing a lot of work, but less so when they're remote. So it's very important to seek that out when you're hiring a remote person. You definitely want to make sure that you're looking for somebody who's self-motivated, somebody who will go and get work done because they want to, not because they have to, things like that. Another really important thing to remember is that people will goof off during work time. At least, well, most people will goof off during work time. Slight side note, I had a German coworker once who would, we were sitting there drinking and having a good time at lunch, and he came in and he says, "What are you people doing?" He says, "In Germany, I go to work at 8, I leave work at 4, I work for all that time, then I go to the bar with my coworkers for the next 4 hours, and then I go home to my wife. Why do you guys mix your drinking and your playing and your working?" So, I guess different cultures have different ethics about working in the office or not, but in general, people are going to waste time. So expect that, right? Don't sit there and ding people when their Git check-ins stop for 2 hours and then you find out that they were playing a video game, but you know what? Maybe they needed to play that video game to recharge. They were going to do it at the office anyway, except in the office, they were going to go hide in the conference room and do it. Sorry to give away your secret. But at home, at least they can do it out in the open. But just remember that people do that. You need to trust your people that they're going to do the right thing, and that even though they're going to goof around, they're going to still get their work done. Very important personal lesson, it's really important to have a good standard routine to get yourself in the right mood for working. It's important if you have a spouse that you agree on a work start and a work stop time that you try to stick to. These things are really important because otherwise you will find yourself working all hours of the day, and sometimes I'll find myself at 4 in the afternoon and I haven't actually brushed my teeth or gotten dressed or anything like that because I just sat down and started working. So it's really important to have a routine around it. And an important tip that I learned from some other people is some people really need that mental routine to get going. So they'll actually shower, get dressed, and then go out for a 10-minute walk around the block, and then come back to their house and say, okay, I'm in work mode now, and now I'm working. And then at the end of the day, they'll walk backwards. They'll do the same walk in the other direction and say, okay, now I'm at home, and this is my home time now. So some people have to have that mental break, that thing that they do. So basically, they need that commute to put them into workspace and then come out of workspace. And it's important that you make sure that your employees go outside once in a while to remind them to go outside. If you work from home, there's definitely this. I've definitely had multiple days in a row where I suddenly realized I have not left the house in 4 days. So it's really important, especially if they work alone or they don't have a lot of family and friends around. Basically, the only thing that gets me to leave the house is the fact that my family lives nearby and says, hey, it's dinner time and we're going out. Otherwise, I could probably go weeks without leaving the house. So because Amazon Fresh brings all the groceries now. So you got to be real careful about that, and you got to make sure that your employees aren't falling into this trap. Encourage them to go out. If you have some money in your company, pay for them to go out, pay for them to have experiences outside their house just so they can do it. And also, ergonomics and fitness is really important. So the biggest thing so when I left Netflix, I gained like 25 pounds, and I realized the reason was because I did not have access to a gym anymore. I did not have access to the pool anymore. I did not have access to my standing desk anymore. And so all of these things were, and I didn't have access to healthy prepared lunches every day, right? I was eating garbage out of the cabinet. So, all of these things are very important. And even though you're not paying for an office, if you can, it's great to make sure that your employees have all of these things available to them. Standing desks, ergonomics, things like that, especially because people tend to have terrible ergonomics at home. They work on the couch, they work on the floor, on the bed, whatever. And the good diets, right? So you want to make sure to encourage the healthy eating and things like that, because it's really easy to just sit down and eat a bag of chips for lunch, especially when no one else is around to shame you for doing it. So another one is it's essential, if you can, to have a door to your office. If you live alone, I guess your apartment door is your door, but otherwise it's really important to have some way to close yourself off. Now that I have a 2.5-year-old, it turns out that door lock is like the best thing that I have in my house. Unfortunately now, that means instead of her like walking in, it just means I get to listen to Daddy and her banging on the door. So we're still working on that one, but it's really important to have a way to separate out the family so that they know this is work time now, please don't bother me, I'm trying to get things done. And that's actually a lot of people who complain about working at home doesn't work. That's what they complain about, that there's more distractions at home than at work. I often find myself reminding my wife that it's called work from home, not chores from home, because she really wants me to do that. So, and I get it. She needs help. It's fine. But there's certain times where I just have to close the door and say, I'm working now. I need to code, or I need to write. I need to talk to somebody. I need to have an important meeting, and it would really ruin the aesthetic if I have a 2-year-old there. So, door is really essential. And then the great unsolved problem is whiteboarding. I have yet to find a good solution to a collaborative whiteboarding session. There's just no good tools out there. There are some tools available that require both people to have a webcam and an iPad and a whiteboard and all of this stuff, and those don't even work that well, and it's thousands of dollars of equipment for each employee. So if anybody knows of a decent replacement for 2 people staying at a whiteboard working out the architecture of software, please let me know, because I have not found one. So that is most of what I have to say about that. If you have any questions or whatever, there's lots of ways to find me. We also have about 15 minutes right now, so let's get started. Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I think something you also kind of exposed with your being able to close the door, is my internalized opinion. I'm curious about yours as to the open workspace, which I think is a disaster.
My opinion on the
At least the cubicle walls.
my opinion on the open workspace. I think my opinion is.
It's a detractor to not be able to separate yourself from people messing around and goofing off.
Yeah,
Hide if there's walls.
I think probably almost everyone at this point agrees, except the people who pay the bills, that open workspaces are terrible. That's not true, actually. I have a friend who loves open workspace, and in fact, when I asked him if he wanted to ever come work for me, he said, no, and it has nothing to do with you or your product or your company. It has to do with the fact that I love talking to my coworkers in person, and I would never work for a remote company because I cannot talk to my coworkers. So there are people who like that, but I think most of us probably do not, and so yeah, I agree that the open floor plan is terrible. Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
So how do you talked about a bunch of problems, including the whiteboard problem?
Yeah.
How do you mitigate the problems?
So the whiteboarding problem, I have not found a good mitigation yet. The closest I get is I pull up a whiteboard behind me and I have my webcam and I draw some stuff and then the people point and say change that and it takes a lot of extra time. This, no this, no this, instead of just having them walk up. Google Slides, okay. Does it work? Like as well as the whiteboard? Okay. Okay. All right, but that's actually a pretty good solution, Google Slides, and we've kind of used. We tried to use a similar thing once with it was a flowcharting thing that let multiple people edit it once. So yeah, that's about the best we can get. I like the Google Slides though. I think I'm going to try that next time. What was that? What is? I don't know what that. Oh, Lucid Chart. Okay. Is that collaborative also? Okay, so Lucid Chart. There you go. Another possible option.
Is Google Slides just like a Google document?
Yeah, Google Slides is like Google Docs, but it's like bad PowerPoint. So it gives you shapes and arrows and lines and stuff like that. Yeah.
I've tried the Syndic, the 23-inch screen which you write on.
Yeah.
Take me from me to them, but they can't come back to me, but at least they can see real time.
Okay. But that's a piece of hardware, right? That's very expensive. Yeah.
See if this is all startup small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
How do we go about liabilities and who pays to set these things up in the individual homes? And who's liable if something goes wrong?
So who's liable for setting these up? Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. Typically, the person who's setting it up is the person whose home it is, so they have to set it up or arrange to set it up. It kind of depends on how much money you have, whether you can pay an installer to come and do it for them, or whether you say, just go on Amazon and order whatever you need and set it up for yourself. And if something goes wrong, again, that's another area where you can't just call IT and have them show up and fix the thing. You have to have them like run out to the Apple store and buy a new laptop or whatever, and then deal with it later. So it's definitely a bigger overhead as far as like not having IT and facilities there. I mean, working in an office, that was one of the really nice things. I could drop a laptop at IT and 20 minutes later have a brand new one that was already set up. So yeah, that's been an issue. So far, not a huge issue, and that goes back to the whole like making sure everything is synchronized, right? So each individual may not have a good backup policy. So make sure that they don't have to worry about it because it's just always backed up. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you dealt with paying and how to handle payment for the remote employees elsewhere in the world?
Have I dealt with paying remote employees outside the United States? No, I actually haven't. I don't have anybody who takes money outside the US yet, so I haven't had to deal with it. Although working outside of the state of California is almost as hard, except for the lack of currency conversion. So every state has their own way of like allowing you to pay and different things you have to pay. It's a huge pain in the ass. So far though, credit to Gusto, they've been super helpful in helping me figure it out. Gusto support has been amazing. When I get an employee in a new state, I just ask them, what do I need to do for this person? And they almost always have a web page. It says like, here's the exact steps you need to take. There is another company, I can't remember the name right now, that basically became experts at paying people outside the US. Yeah. Maybe that was what it was.
Well, it used to be Errands, but it's not close, but we kind of like, they take 10% off.
Yeah, so that's because they're firm. But what I'm saying is they figured out how to like pay everybody. He told me that most countries, it's basically you just send them the money, like however they prefer to receive it, and then you file a W-8, I think it is. Maybe someone can tell me if I'm wrong. No? Well, so he was mostly dealing with third world countries. Yeah. Yeah, so outside the US, he was employing them as contractors. So they were employees, he would send them like shirts and stuff, but Yeah, basically it was,
Payroll here is an employee.
yeah,
I'm responsible for that person.
right.
And same with other countries. I have companies in the US, Hong Kong, and India, and
Yeah.
Australia, and each of those entities have to manage each of those staff.
Okay.
Hey, nice to meet you. Likewise.
Yeah. Get an accountant, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you just have to get, some states require you to buy it from an in-state entity. Washington is one of those states. So, but like Gusto actually just kind of does it for you. Like they just say, go here and pay these people, or we'll pay these people money for you on your behalf. You can go and get your own insurance agent. But yeah, some states require it from an in-state entity, some don't care. Owners don't have to pay workers' comp, so, but some states don't realize that. We had a big fight with New York. They tried to fine us like $40,000, and then we said, no, he's an owner, and it took like 8 months to convince him that he's an owner, so it's a big pain. Is there a practical limit to the number of employees you can have 100% remote? Probably. I haven't gotten to it yet. Oh, so I just started a new company, so right now we're at 2, but including myself. But I mean, you know, we had like 5 at most. I've never gotten anywhere close to where it would matter. But if you talk to people who work at, say, GitHub, right? So GitHub is, they're not exactly 100% remote, but they essentially work like they are. And they're in fact sending people out, like their CTO recently just went fully remote. So they have a few thousand people, right? And they're doing it. And mostly they're doing it by using GitHub's collaboration tools to do it. So it's sort of like a dog fooding kind of exercise. Or I just heard a replacement term for dog fooding. I forgot what it was. It was like caviaring or something to make it sound less gross. But anyway, they're using their own tools, and so they're at a few thousand as possible. But really, I think at the end of the day, what's going to need to happen is some extremely successful company is going to have to be fully remote before people really start buying into the idea that it's possible. So we're going to need to basically have a fully remote startup that's extremely successful. Maybe GitHub will be that one. But until you see a public company that's like fully remote or almost fully remote, it's going to be a hard sell at any size.
One, I just think you have to separate science and capital equipment things where you need to be in a lab with millions of dollars of equipment. That's never going to work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's certain companies where this will never work, right? Any hardware engineering company basically this is not going to work. At least not for the people who are actually working on the hardware. Like, I don't think Tesla could have 100% remote workforce, you know? Any other questions? All right. Well, I'll be up here for a little bit, so thank you all for coming, and thank you all for listening.